model as well. And we do need to take into consideration they're much further ahead than we are as far as the health crisis. So the way they started was also hybrid, but when the kids were on campus, they stayed actually in one room as a cohort, and the teachers would come to them. So they didn't have to move around during the day and get in contact with other kids. Another thing they did, and I know this is a different situation here with the budgets and so forth, but they were able to get, I think it was the event center in the city, they lent them their big event center, so they were able to set up classrooms there with adequate spacing between the students. And they also were able to have some teaching outside. So that was another thing that helped, you know, because the indoor air is the worst, as we all know. So I think my biggest concern about middle school going back, it's what I mentioned, going from classroom to classroom. It doesn't seem like the best way to mitigate the risk of a very contagious virus. And then as moving back to distance learning, then I know that's an option to go for 100% distance learning too, if we have concerns. And I don't think there was a whole lot explained about how distance learning will look for the fall if we pick that model. So definitely I would like to know some more about that as a parent before I make a choice. That being said, our kids did okay with distance learning. We realized that this was an emergency situation. We have to all remember we are in a pandemic and things cannot be normal, right? And school can't be normal either. And that's why, you know, distance learning, of course, is not perfect, but I would say in the situation we were in, I think everyone did their best. I think we are from Abbott Middle School. I think the teachers there, they did an awesome job considering what they had to deal with. Now that there's more time to prepare for the fall, I hope, of course, there's going to be a few changes to distance learning if we pick that model. And one thing would maybe be a little more real-time instruction and more accountability for students to actually show up to meetings and so forth. There's, you know, a list of things. But and then I also want to mention that another thing that parents need to consider is, you know, how do the teachers feel about this? We're talking about their workplace. I know there's a lot of parents that are complaining, but we need to make sure that the teachers feel safe when they go back to work too. And I think that's important, as well as our kids are safe. So those are some of the things I've been thinking. I have a lot of stuff on my mind about school openings, and I'm just interested in hearing what everyone else has to say. Another thing what Chelsea mentioned was the masks. I'm a big supporter of wearing masks. I think it does help, you know, mitigating the risk. That's what I believe in. And of course, I'm afraid that, you know, school's open and, you know, half of the kids might not want to wear it or whatever. And so that's another thing. Things have also, you know, they become a little bit political sometimes when we talk about those things, and that makes it even more difficult. So, so if I would love to hear what everyone else has to say, and I might have more things that come up. And if anyone has questions about how they did it in Denmark, the school openings, feel free to ask. I just know that has been a model for a long time there, even without a crisis, that kids are divided into cohorts and you stay in the same classroom, teachers come to the kids. And that's not new just because of the crisis. That has always been like that. And I know that some administrators say that scheduling is completely impossible to do that way, but I grew up with it and our administrators were able to schedule it that way. It's just it's a different way of looking at scheduling than right now for middle schools. So.
Well, thank you, Trina. Trina sent an email with a lot of questions too, which I think, you know, we could also share some of those. It could be for future conversations because lots of issues are there. Craig, did you want to share anything about the high school district's take on the structuring or how the class movement goes or anything else?
Sure. So if you guys joined late, I'm the president of the Teachers Association for the high school district. I also have a child at Aragon and a child at Burrell, and I teach physics at Hillsdale High School. But our position right now as an association is to start this fall semester with 100% remote learning. And the reason, there are two primary reasons. There are lots of reasons, but there are two primary reasons. The first is that any blended model where students come in 1 or 2 days a week and don't and have to be masked and physically distanced are not going to get the in-person instruction that the district seems to be, promoting. There'll be very little interaction with kids, very little group work, and no labs, no activities, no collaborative work. So there's that problem. But but if you drill down on it a bit, the off days, meaning the times when kids are not in school, they will have to be engaged in asynchronous learning activities. So screencasts, videos, that sort of thing, because the teachers will be involved in dealing with, the group B masked groups. So each time that the kids are coming in, we're leaving at least half or 2/3 of the kids behind at home without synchronous learning. So there's an educational piece, there's a pedagogical piece that we believe that the best thing to do right now is 100% remote learning, because we can do that synchronously with a bell schedule, with accountability, with opportunity for support, with opportunity to engage in rich activities, albeit online. But that's the best we can do right now. And of course, the second reason that we're promoting that is that it's just unsafe. It's unsafe to be indoors, as I'm sorry if I'm going to mispronounce her name, but Trina said, indoors is far worse than outdoors. And if you read Scott Morrow's recent statement, he reiterates that multiple times in his text. Mask wearing is absolutely a must if we're going to be engaged in any kind of activity with other people indoors. But as Dr. Morrow says, the cloth masks, anything less than an N95 mask does not prevent aerosol transmission. I think that those two reasons, the educational reason, meaning we can engage kids with synchronous 5-day-a-week instruction, and the safety reasons, meaning we're not putting kids and families at higher risks. That's why we're moving towards 100% remote learning, or the teachers want that. But the even bigger picture is that why are we even considering those two options and remote learning, is that we want to get back to in-person instruction as soon as we possibly can when it's safe. And if we start the year with any kind of a blended model, we're going to be dealing with some haphazard, slowed down curriculum with very restrictive environments that we're not going to be able to nimbly be able to transition back into in-person instruction. With a remote learning model, we can move forward. We can continue to do rich curriculum 5 days a week with accountability for kids. And then when it does become safe, we can transition quickly, and we'll be able to move into in-person instruction again. A lot of people say that we are waiting for a vaccine, and that's just not true. We're waiting for it to be safe. And if we could say that every kid got tested every 2 weeks, or there were enough contact tracers in the county, which there are not, if we could say those are the kinds of triggers that we would consider when going back to full-time in-person instruction, because that's ultimately our goal. Right now, the school board has given direction to staff, meaning district administrators, to develop an online schedule, a remote learning schedule, so that we can move forward. And I hope that the board on the 25th listens to parents, listens to teachers, listens to the community, that we want to move forward with the best educational model that we can, and position ourselves well to transition effectively when it becomes safe. The concern I have is that there are many parents in the community, and so far I haven't heard anybody on this call, but there are many parents in the community who are really demanding that their child get back into school. And unfortunately, with all due respect, I think they're ill-informed, not only about the seriousness of the pandemic. And again, I liked what Trina said, that this is the regulations and the restrictions are not the obstacle, right? It's the pandemic that's causing the restrictions. I think that the parents who desperately want their kids in, that's totally understandable, but I believe they're uninformed or somewhat blinded by personal desires. I want the kids in the classroom too, but it's just not safe. And then the second thing I think they're uninformed about is, according to all the regulations and all the restrictions, there's nothing we can offer these kids when they come back into school and that will resemble anything like school was before March 13th, because they will be in masks, they will be 6 feet apart, they will be in cohorts of only 12, which they can't make it work with master scheduling because they have to switch classes in mixed groups for singleton classes. So there's so many obstacles that I wish our district had been more forthright about communicating to the parent community so that we could have made a better choice and a more timely choice, because we do have time over the summer. But as of today, I believe today is the 20th, we have less than 60 days before the start of school. And telling teachers to wait and not prepare over the summer is putting everyone in a bad situation. So that's sort of my piece where we are as a teachers association, and we're just hoping that the board will continue to move in that direction to protect kids and protect families.
I have one question, Craig. I know this is a different, the technology and the access is going to be different in every district. Although some of your students, of course, have family who are also in the San Mateo Foster City School District and other districts, right? So they may have technology. Did your teachers find the access and any of that to be a barrier as some other districts might have? I don't sense that it was as much.
I'm sorry.
I didn't hear that it was as much because I thought that they were issuing a lot of devices and it was fairly quick.
That's correct. They certainly made every effort to move every family and every student to a one-to-one technology rate, meaning each kid had a device that would connect and engage them. Mm-hmm. It did, because of the abrupt change on March 13th and the time to get things moving. Infrastructure took time to respond, and so I believe even 4 weeks in, there were still households who either had no device or no internet. But our district did, by the fifth or sixth week out, the entire school district, every kid had a one-to-one device, and they had distributed enough hotspots, internet hotspots, so that everybody had connection. And so that is absolutely a challenge, and that is something that I think is the big. It's going. Even though we may have been successful in the spring, it's still going to be the heavy lift in the fall. That we need to get kids connected. We need to get kids equipped. We need to provide for options for students who may not have a place in their home to do the work. So I think there's a lot to deal with. But that is absolutely the goal. The district has budgeted a large sum of money to buy new Chromebooks, and they're all interconnected at the district level so that any updates can happen remotely, so that the students don't have to worry about any of that. So, we're crossing our fingers on that one. But yes, that is absolutely a hurdle that needs to be overcome. And I'll just say one real quick thing too, about the spring versus the fall in terms of distance learning, is that in the spring, there was it was new, we were dealing with sort of in crisis mode, and we really spent a lot of energy trying to deal with kids' mental health and teachers' mental health and families' mental health, and make sure that we didn't, put undue burdens on them in terms of due dates or synchronous learning. That's not what we can do in the fall. We have to hold kids accountable, but we also have to provide the supports for them to be engaged in learning. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the remote learning of the fall is going to be drastically different than the remote learning of the spring.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Yeah, I feel like, well, I know the high school district has a bit more money than some of the elementary school districts, which is, lucky for things like this when they come along, right? Where you can bolster that. I think maybe some of the other districts might have somewhat of a different experience, but I know there are a lot of Chromebooks that they have access to that they just, need to take out of the classrooms, right? And they've done that, is what I've heard for the most part, but still some gaps remain. So, all right. Does anyone else have any comments on that or another issue you'd like to launch into?
Craig, I'm curious how teachers are thinking about the students for whom distance learning was especially challenging for a variety of reasons, and one of which is they may be taking care of younger siblings or having to work, or I know that educators care deeply about all students, including those students, and wondering what the thinking is around making that more successful for some of the students who maybe are socioeconomically disadvantaged or otherwise, including kids with special needs. But
yeah, I can only speak for our suggestions or our proposals, but we've asked for. I should step back. I mean, what we're really looking for at this point is to establish a default of remote learning, so that we can get the year moving and move through instruction in a timely and meaningful way. And that's the big hurdle at this point to get over. But in addition to that, we're discussing both internally in our association, but also with the district about, how and when to, phase in subgroups, and what those subgroups might be. I have to be, clear that many of the ed specialists, the special ed teachers, are very concerned about bringing students with IEPs or students with special needs back in first to an unsafe environment, and certainly an environment that is less than conducive to social interaction when they're in a mask and they're socially distanced, and that there may be adverse effects there. So we do have a work group right now that's working on kids with IEPs, special ed. We do have a work group with EL teachers who are discussing ways that we might address those needs, to phase them in terms of getting them in person. But Heather, I know you asked about how are we going to deal with just the remote learning piece of it. Again, I'm speaking from a teacher's point of view and from a leader of the teachers. So I think that's what we need to concentrate on. But we've implored the district to consider, leveraging resources. As Chelsea said, our district is somewhat fortunate to have some resources that we could perhaps shift or repurpose to have outreach for kids that have those difficulties or difficulty connecting, so to speak. I mean, that's a broad moniker, but I think that's the idea. I think what we've been really concerned about is just making sure that we can facilitate the essential service of providing coherent and synchronous education. But I think the district really needs to work on, some sort of outreach and repurposing of resources so that we can address the needs of students who have had difficulties.
I can also, as a parent, I can also speak to special needs kids. So my daughter is on an IEP. she's deaf, so she does receive speech therapy, which is, I would probably in a pandemic, both for her speech therapist and her own sake, I would probably prefer that being distance learning, because, you know, speech therapy, that's a very close up, a very close up task, where they I don't know if they can distance, you know, always. So, and plus I have friends who are SLPs, and they are also very concerned. In addition, I also know people who work one-on-one with special needs kids, and they are not really sure how to stay safe, because I mean, some kids, they will just run right up to you and scream in your face, cough in your face. Sometimes there's even spit involved, you know, and these kids, you know, sometimes it will be very difficult to put a mask on them or to put a face shield on them. So I don't know how safe that is either for the educator. As far as my daughter, she's also a little bit more vulnerable than other kids when it comes to her health. So of course I have concerns there too about sending her to school. And I think a lot of special needs kids, they have extra things going on, and they are probably some of the more vulnerable population in our schools. So I think that needs to be considered too.
I'd like Craig.
Oh,
Can I ask Craig a question?
Yeah.
So Craig, you had said that the high schools would like to start 100% distance learning and then bring in, you know, a hybrid model as when that is ready. And I'm curious what would be the factors or the triggers from your point of view that would say it's okay to bring kids back in.
Well, let me first say that it's our position, the teacher's position,
Yeah.
that we start with a remote learning model. The district has not agreed to that yet, and the board has not ruled on that yet. But if you think that's a sound first step, come on out to the board meeting and tell them that. But honestly, yes, we've talked about a lot of different phase-in models. I don't know that I would say that it's a phase-in of a blended model. I think that it would be a phase-in of trying to address the needs of particular groups in a particular way. And I'm not trying to mince words, but the blended model is, the moniker blended model typically means, you know, it's for everyone. And if a kid comes on Monday, then they're not coming on Tuesday and Wednesday, and so forth. What we're looking at is possible ways to integrate specific services that will support students with particular needs. But that also, it doesn't necessarily only include, you know, kids with hardship or ELs or special ed. It might also include PE, for example, that we need to get kids to have some physical activity. It might include band, who, you know, without being in the same, you know, location, even if it's outside, they can't play a concert or practice together. So we're looking at a lot of different things. But in terms of criteria, that's a really good question, and we're still kind of struggling with that. And again, because we don't have agreement from the district yet, you know, we haven't drilled down on it. But in my personal feelings and what I would say is I would look to the county in terms of the ability to test rapidly and thoroughly the number of students that are coming on campus so that people could feel safe. I would say that the ability to contact trace at a level that is appropriate according to the county's own criteria, which is 15 contact tracers per 100,000 residents. And we're woefully below that. So things that are external that I think we could look to, but also I think, you know, we need to think about how we can, despite all of those, we need to really think about how we can bring kids on safely so that we don't endanger them or their families. You know, I think, you know, many of those, the criteria, these triggers may end up being, the trigger that brings us back in full time. I mean, if there are, the vaccine is a pipe dream, it's not going to be available for quite some time. But if we can move to a place where we're confident that there's a level of risk that is so small that we don't have to worry about families and kids, I think those are the things that we have to consider. So I'm sorry if I'm not giving specifics. We just haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'd like to address it from another point of view. I don't have kids at school anymore. I have a daughter that teaches at Sunnybray, and I have a grandson at Baywood. And I'm RSP, so I'm under the umbrella of special ed, but I work with kids with IEPs. And everything keeps changing and evolving. And when I heard that I had to push in, because I never push in, I have a huge classroom and I have maybe 1 or 2 kids at a time. And it was like, I don't feel that you all are talking about kids, and I do really care about kids, but I also care about myself and I care about the other teachers. I don't feel safe. I don't feel like it's being addressed. I feel like a lot of children's are being addressed. Supposedly the model was that I was going to push in. Well, there's no way I'm going to push in, because I have to, if I'm sitting next to a kid, which of course I'm not supposed to because it's 6 feet away, I'm also exposed to the other 12, and then I'm exposed to the other and the other and the other. And, you know, in reality, they're not going to keep their masks on. It's hard enough for adults to keep their masks on. And so, you know, there's exposure there, and they're not going to keep 6 feet apart, because I know that when I went back to school, you know, at the very end of school, we're people and we're social and we drift, you know, so all of a sudden that 6 feet isn't. What I'm also concerned about is, let's say your kid is on an A day and you're a working parent. Where is that, where are your kids going to go after a half day? And on the days they don't go at all, and you have 2 parents working, where are they going to go? You know, because it's like the district can't afford all the daycare that they would provide. Plus, we keep using the word cohort. You have to stay with your cohorts. But then if you're lucky enough to have, let's say, an after-school program, now all of a sudden you're with a different set of cohorts. And I also I don't feel safe, because as a teacher, the kids are going to go home and a lot of the parents work. I don't know these parents. I don't know what their working environment is. I don't know if they're keeping social distance, if they're wearing masks, and then they're going to come home and maybe bring something to the kids, and then I'm working with the kids. I like Craig's example. I like Craig's idea of the distant learning. I don't really like it. Though, I mean, I probably had more meltdowns than any child trying to learn it, but I realized that I can learn it and I can be good at it. I just don't think I think it's a question of politics and not wanting to lose money and bringing the kids in before we're really prepared to deal with a lot of the issues.
Yeah, Nancy, thank you for sharing that. I wanted to make sure that we have about 10 minutes left in the time that I provided, but I wanted to address or see if anyone has any comments on kind of that point that Nancy just made, in terms of, and maybe Craig, you might, you know, have thoughts on this as well, or anyone. Some of the things that the boards are looking at approving, you know, in terms of the phasing in and maybe doing it too quickly, by what it sounds like some of the concerns are very high from various parties, even here, have to do with policies that are in front of them. You know, San Mateo Foster City had, and I'm sure they will have on their high school board agenda, you know, the instructional minutes that they have to allocate, and the ADA funding and all of the things that are pushed down from the state. And I'm concerned that that is what's governing some of the decisions rather than what's in the best interest of our teachers and our kids.
Yeah,
And our staff.
can I interject for a second? I had
Absolutely.
something to go along with Nancy's.
Hi, John.
I work in the after school for the at Abbott, and I'm also the CSEA, the California School Employees Association, Chapter 411 treasurer. We were told in negotiations that basically if we weren't working with the kids, then there was no real use for us. And it's that type of thinking that's going into this. It's like, well, we're going to open up on this date and we're going to do this, and then you're going to go along with this, or you're going to be forced to take leaves and you're going to be forced to do this. There's a whole bunch of people in our situation that are at high risk or live with people at high risk. And we're being told that, you know, you're disaster workers, you're essential workers, and therefore you are required to come into this like we're, you know, like it's an earthquake or something. And they're literally, it feels like they're throwing us into harm's way. I mean, any congregation of any group of people, whether they're children or whether they're adults, at this point is a problem. And I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to the news, but in San Mateo, it's been steady. But all around us in California, we got places where it's going up. This virus doesn't know boundaries, you know, and we are basically inviting these, they're telling us we need to open these germ factories and we need to do it soon. And we're going to make it as safe as possible, but nobody can say that it's going to be safe, right? So, and to be told things like, you know, you're basically, you need to be working or you're not, or we can't pay you. Well, that's putting us in a really difficult situation. So I'm going to be working this summer. I start on July 6th doing a summer camp with a group of 12 kids. I feel like it's insane. I don't know why anybody would want to send their kids to this, but there are people. Also, there's a whole lot of stuff that they're saying that we need to provide mental health therapy for these kids. We need to provide food. We need to provide this and that. And that goes way beyond childcare and way beyond education. And I'm not saying that we don't have a role in that, but why are we being relied on for this? I mean, we're educators and we're childcare specialists. You know, I mean, I don't see how we're the only people that are responsible for people's mental health or for their source of food, or like, and I'm, you know, this is mental diarrhea here, so I'm going to stop, but.
Thank you for sharing that, John. I mean, you raise a lot of really important issues, and yeah, that is really scary. And from my perspective, I'll just interject, you know, briefly. The thought that there isn't a role for our staff, let alone certain teachers, in this environment is, to me, just insane, right? Because there are so many needs, and it doesn't mean that you would necessarily be doing the same thing in person, but I can't imagine that some of those tasks there could be other things, right? We need to think outside the box, that's what I'm saying. And when we do go back, eventually we will, at some point, what's going to happen to all of those, you know, those positions and our teacher pipeline as well, that it's already lacking. I mean, I'm just so worried about it going forward for those reasons. I know there are funding issues, but that raises just a lot of concerns for me, as well as the policies that we just can't comply with right now. We need to think outside of the box, or they need to be asking for waivers, or the state needs to just stop the madness. But anyway, I will stop if anyone else wants to comment in our last little bit of time. I'm happy to stay on longer too if anybody wants to, you know, or we can end it, you know, at 4 too. That's fine.
I would love to hear what you think, Chelsea.
On which topic?
Just in terms of the plans for the fall and.
Yeah, I mean, I have had a personally very hard time with distance learning at the middle school level, but you know, I also have a child who has a psychiatric disability, mental health, you know, there. And so the part of school that he needs, which is the social part, isn't possible right now. So we just have to re-envision that for ourselves. The academic part was fine, but there are indeed things that we just really can't do over distance. And you know what? It's okay for a little while, I think. What I think is that I agree wholeheartedly with Craig in that, you know, we need to do what's safe. And these frameworks and structures and things that suggest that we're going to go back and it's going to be safe and we can do things at 6 feet apart with a mask, I just don't see how that's possible. And I do feel like we were on a call, Heather, you were on a call, you were on a panel that I listened to a couple of weeks ago. And it was like with younger kids, the very youngest kids, right? And how, yes, you do everything possible and you've been in the forefront of providing that care during the pandemic for very small kids and bigger kids too. And it's, you know, somewhat safe, but you can't do everything. There are things you have to be within 6 feet. So if you look at the pillars for the county and the state, all the things, we really can't do them all. So it's like, who's at risk? What leverage, you know, or how much, you don't know, how comfortable, what's your threshold of comfort? And I have heard in our district people talking about, and San Mateo Foster City is, you know, where I am right now in the district. And, you know, how some people are comfortable, some parents might choose to go, some might not. And what I hear in all of that is still not safe. And I also hear a lot of inequity there. When we put out those choices about who can be where and who can't, and they get to choose, as with distance learning, there's a lot of privilege that comes with being able to do that well. And so I have always been a proponent of talking about equity and how do we get there. And now we have a lot of other things going on in the world that are showing those things. And it's just something that we have to think carefully about. You know, even if you made a small group of children, how diverse is that group, right? It just, those things are on my mind. So yeah, thanks for asking. Does anyone else have any comments as we, you know, I'd love to continue this conversation at a future time. I will definitely be putting out other times to gather if you wish. And I'll try to pin down on some of the issues that are here. And maybe we'll have more information as board meetings happen later this week about what plans are and what that looks like and how teachers and parents are feeling. But I don't know, Heather, I know you have maybe some experience with those younger kids. Eileen works with, she's on the call still, and Eileen works, you know, with the kids in the physical education realm at Laurel. And
well, you know,
yeah, I'd love to hear about your thoughts.
One of the biggest concerns I've had all along is San Mateo Foster City School District prides themselves on busing students from one neighborhood to the other as a way to promote equity in schools. But the fact of the matter is you cannot socially distance that many kids on a bus every day to and from school. And so I feel the pandemic, even if you just started with everybody dropping their kids off at their neighborhood school, the list of concerns and measures that need to take place to keep kids safe is a list that they may not be able to maintain. Then you throw on top of that, we're going to put a bunch of kids on a bus and send them across town, and it's impossible. So the amount of money that would need to be spent on the number of buses to properly socially distance kids would bankrupt the district by itself. So, you know, I feel like the district and other districts, if they have that same model, need to start looking seriously at
is the risk worth the cost, health-wise and financially, to continue to bus kids around town? Maybe the better model is to look at how can we have kids be going to school within their neighborhoods, because it's another way to contain the spread of germs if you're walking to your school as opposed to riding a bus with other kids constantly intermingling. It's not going to maintain that protocol of keeping a certain number of kids together all the time. Does that mean you're going to have one bus for every 12 kids in the district? It just, so many things that seem a little impossible. So I have already said in the chat, I feel that we need to look at distance learning full time for all students, because the safety is just impossible to maintain, even with the best intentions. So that's my concern. For younger kids, it's not easy already. No way you're going to be keeping these kids wearing masks. They're not very compliant as it is in other ways, bless their hearts, because of just the age they are. So those are my concerns.
Thank you. And you know, on the note of, you know, if we just were to focus on distance learning like we have been and just really embrace that, we need to be able to do it a little bit better, right, for all the kids. And so what I'd love to have a, you know, future conversation. I know there's some trainings that are being offered through different resources and obviously a million webinars. For teachers, I would love to see more things for parents, because parents are, you know, well, at home with the kids, if they can be, right, or some other adults, hopefully. And so ideas are information about resources in that front, and just like how we do that, and how just a little bit better, and resources that the districts are providing. I'd love to know more about that in a future call as well.
And how do we get parents to get the word out so they know where to show up and when, in addition to school board meetings, to let their voice be heard about concerns about whatever plans are in place? I know the school board meeting coming up for the high school, but at some point, how much participation do parents get other than filling out a survey to say we want this and to actually be heard is a concern.
Yeah, I mean, we have some pretty great stakeholder groups represented here, and you know, CSEA and the teachers unions, and I think that it's the voice of everyone, right? Which is why I was excited that we could have this representation on this call and even just start a conversation. It has to be an ongoing conversation. It can't happen every 2 weeks or whatever, every month or so at a school board meeting. But you know, it's how do you make that known? So, you know, moving forward, I think it's going to be incumbent upon us to be louder in what we want. And, you know, like Craig said, if you care about this, that is a forum to do it. As a board member, I always was encouraging people to come and speak, because that is where the whole board hears you, and at least you don't have to contact them individually. But maybe the staff and teachers on the call, maybe, you know, and Eileen, you are one of those. If parents share that with you, do you have a way to push that forward through the work that you're doing? Is that helpful? That's another question, you know, to have more communication between parents and teachers, assuming that it isn't already a great line of communication. I think it might be there, but maybe can be better.
Chelsea, if I could just jump in really quickly, just
Sure.
for perspective. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to dominate the conversation. It's just I've been steeped in this for the last, you know, 6 months. You know, I think it's really, really, really important what you said about parents advocating and trying to learn more and trying to understand more, because, you know, I hate to say it, but we can't rely on the school districts necessarily to put out the best information to families. I mean, I think they do a pretty good job, but I have to say, in the case of our district, and again, I'm a parent in the district as well as a teacher, you know, the survey that went out to parents had no description whatsoever of what school might look like in the fall. Had no description whatsoever about how distance learning could be different from the spring to the fall. And so there's a distinct disconnect between what we will be able to offer, should the district decide to bring students into the classroom, there's a distinct disconnect between what the reality is and what parents have been led to believe. Parents with whom I've spoken read the survey, which said basically, do you want your kid to go back to school and in-person learning, or do you want to continue, meaning continue the spring, continue distance learning? And I think that's misleading and perhaps even, intentional. I'm not sure, but I think that there's a huge disconnect between the parent community and what's really being offered in the school districts. And so I think it's incumbent upon all parents to really ask more questions and really drill down on the details, because it's not only the safety of their kids, but it's the safety of their families. And really it's a public health issue that I think we need to make informed decisions. Whatever your opinions are, we need to make informed decisions, and we can only be informed if we ask those questions.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, in the end, who gets to make that final decision of how school is going to look in the fall? I know the districts need to take input from many different places, but it's all over the place. It's like there's so many different opinions out there. So who are they ultimately going to listen to? I got the feeling in this board meeting the other day that they don't even feel like they have clear guidelines from the health officer. It's just kind of been put on the school districts now to kind of figure out how they want to do the fall.
Ultimately, Heather's right. She put it in the text or the chat. It's the school board who makes the decision. And that's why it's really important to inform your community, inform your parent group, your teachers, and make sure that people understand what's going on, because the school board, they're charged. Chelsea, as Chelsea will say, they're entrusted with the direction of the school district, and they have to make decisions based on staff input. And I think it's really, really, really important that everybody is reading the same things and understanding the same facts and so forth. So ultimately, though, it is the school board.
Yeah, we all have to be vigilant, if you will, about understanding the facts about what's going on. Of course, the unions have leverage, right, to work, to make their desires known to the board, but it is the board that makes that decision. And as I mentioned before, when the board is confronted with parent comments, working with the unions, and then all these rules that the state imposes that they have to follow, it's a lot for them to balance. And really, it is a lot, and there's a lot, but I think there has to be a little bit more pushback from those boards to say, those rules are great, but state, we can only do this. And we need to protect our teachers, we need to protect our students, we need to protect our families. And so rather than looking at those guidelines and frameworks, which have all these questions in them, like, yeah, consider this, consider that, they should really just be focused on what's safe and what's for the kids. And that's, obviously my opinion, and I will be sharing it with those that, all of them. But they ultimately make the decision. So. All right. Well, does anyone have any final comments? We're at 4:10, so I know it's a Saturday afternoon. I don't want to keep everyone. I really appreciate everyone who's been able to join. I've learned a lot from the conversation, and I think that the different perspectives are really important to hear. And I hope that we can do this again, and I hope that you'll find a way to share some of the information with someone else so that, we can be a stronger force to move forward and do what's right for all the kids and the teachers and staff.
And I just want to say before we end, thanks to Craig, I think it was really helpful to hear what has been considered, from your perspective, especially because my son is going to Hillsdale next year or in the fall. And I would say that the most sensible way to go I would agree that the phased approach would make the most sense that you were talking about.
Any other comments before we sign off? All right. Well, thank you all. I do plan to post the video just because there were some people who couldn't join. So I will figure out how to do that. And then if you want to reflect on it or look back at the issues, I'm not sure how that works with the chat. Maybe if anybody knows, they can share with me offline. But I do think that this was a great conversation in terms of just starting to vet some of the issues and hear your really super important voices in this. Any final words? All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, and hopefully we'll talk again soon. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.